So as you know, you're NSO users, NEDs are pretty essential to anything. I mean, as soon as you want to do anything with NSO, you need a NED or a bunch of them. So let's talk about NEDs. And when it comes to NEDs, we also want to talk a little bit about what it means to be a NED. And that comes into service automation criteria, which is the quality mark that you need, the rules that the NED must follow in order to be a good NED. And if you have developed a good NED, you want to show the world that you have a good NED. So that's when NSO Interop Lab comes in to demonstrate to other customers and to other users of NSO that you have something that works. Or you can go to EANTC. I'll tell you more about EANTC later. And at the end, I'll touch on what's going on in the YANG world at large, not just here at Cisco, but out in the world, what's going on. But let's look at the economy around NEDs, because that's actually one of the really defining parts of the network management industry and has been for 30 years. Is this part where the OSS, BSS, whatever layer touches the network has always been the place where the cost sits. If you can't deal with that, you don't have a solution, you don't have a play. And that's exactly how this small company, Tailef, could enter the market. Small, tiny player playing against all these IBMs, all the OSS, BSS players out there, big companies with large organizations and large operations. And we could enter that market anyway because we did the NED layer better than they did. So let's look at the NED economy. We have to develop NEDs in order so that NSO will be useful. And we can develop these NEDs in a number of different ways. We can do it over netconf these days. We can do it over CLI, which is perhaps the most common NED approach. And there are many other protocols that you can use to manage a device, like REST, SOAP, Corba, TIL1, and a bunch of other things. If you start with this something else, what you have to do is you have to hand code some sort of YANG file, and then writes code, usually Java code, that is figuring out how to use these different RPC calls that are available on this machine in order to map the YANG objects to operations there. And that's a manual and slow process. And this is actually what all the big players have been doing all those years. So we are no better than they are in this area. We do the same thing. So here we have YANG models for example, the NetScaler that covers 900 leaves. 900 things you can configure. And there's 3,900 lines of Java code to go with that, so that's about 4.3 lines of code per leaf. And we had another VXOI, I don't even remember what it is, but it has only 250 leaves and 1,900 lines of code, which is 7.6 lines of code per leaf. That is expensive. If you want a lot of functionality, and to build that and maintain that is very expensive. For CLI nets, we had the CLI engine in NSO, which makes this so much easier. There you have, again, to write a YANG model for the functionality that you have. And then you have to have code that can do basic things like logging in, recognize this is a prompt or this is an error message, and maybe parse operational data. Here's the counter for the number of packets and things like that. But a lot of the functionality comes automatically. You don't have to write code for every leaf. The CLI parser fixes this. So for example, for iOS XR, we cover something like 60,000 leaves today with 6,000 lines of code, so that's 0.1 lines of code per leaf. And for iOS, it's 0.15. For F5 big IP, it's 2.5 lines of code. So it's approaching that, but it's still on a different league than that. So we can do it much less expensively than those guys can do. So this is what most of you are using, and this is the economy around nets. But we want to go to this world. Here we have netconf, and then we have native netconf interface from the device directly. And a machine like iOS XR, it actually has 200,000 leaves in the netconf YANG model today. Actually, not all functionality in iOS XR is available through netconf at this moment, so this is expected to grow a bit. But I mean, this is all the thing that most people use, and well beyond that. And we don't have any code. There's no code in the net, so it's 0 lines of code per. So the cost is 0 lines of code per leaf. Obviously, there's some testing cost and stuff like that, but the number of lines that we have to write in order to support a leaf is very low. And again, for Junos, for Huawei, this is where we want to go. Here we are eliminating this adapter tax, as it's called. So are we good? Good to go? We just switched netconf and we're in the green world. Well, yeah, kind of. Game, set, and match netconf, I say that, but we get much more functionality, we get much higher reliability because these things, this is very brittle. In many cases, things go wrong somewhere. There's a corner case where things just don't go well. Here's a little bit better, but it's still a lot of special cases to handle. And here, it's normally, once you get something to work in netconf, it keeps working. There are bugs in netconf too, so there may be some use case that gets hung up on something, but once you get it to work, here is something that works. It works every time. It's much more reliable than strange formatting things that can happen in the CLI, or even very much more strange things in the REST API. So this is more functionality, higher reliability, and much lower cost when it works. So when does it work? What does when it works mean? Well, there's a number of RFCs that defines what works mean. And there's something that we call service automation criteria that define rules for this is how you must behave in order for NSO to be effectively useful towards this machine. So how do you know if your machine fulfills these RFCs and the service automation criteria? Well, the answer today is you test. And one thing you can do is if you are an NSO user, and you have some machines that you're either using today or considering to use in the next version of something, and you want to ensure that things will work on that machine, yeah, you can come to us in the NSO Interop Lab. You can also come to the NSO Interop Lab if you're a device vendor and say, hey, I have some customers that are kind of interested in NSO, and I think it would be nice if we could show them already that these kind of use cases, these 5 use cases, actually already we pre-approved them, or we have some sort of way of demonstrating to them that this actually works. So NSO Interop Lab is all about showing and testing how NSO can interoperate with a device over netconf.net. If you're a vendor, you can certainly add conf-d to your product, and that will solve a lot of netconf issues that you could have otherwise. We have seen many different implementations of netconf. Some of them are really good. Some of them are quite okay, but have some issues. And some of them shouldn't be called netconf. When we find non-conformance, we often find things that don't work as they should. But my experience is that when you find things that don't work, most of the time, they're quite local. So this particular part of the module has an issue. If you don't need that part of that module for your system, you can use the rest. It works fine. There are a few things that happen on a broad scale. For example, some devices, they don't deal properly with locking at all. So any sort of, or they don't say hello properly or something, then you can't use it at all. It doesn't work. But if you get past that first level, any sort of a non-conformance is usually quite local. It's like small bugs here and there spread out. And if you don't touch those, it's fine. So service automation criteria, what do you need? Okay, so there's some mandatory basics that the RFCs are talking about. You need to do hello properly, you need to do locking properly, you need to do subtree filtering properly. These are the 3 most common issues with new devices that we see, netconf devices. Then, if you get that working, there's often many models, many YANG models that you download from a device or from the internet. They have syntax errors in them, kind of funny. How can you publish a YANG module with syntax error? You don't do that with C code or Java code, do you? Or Python. Another thing is, even if you get the syntax correct, they often have must and when statements that are just not right. So then you may be using a compiler that is not even looking at these constraints, and they didn't notice. But NSO is looking at these constraints, trying to make sense of them, and we'll notice very quickly when they talk about something that doesn't exist or something like that. And the next level after that is, of course, this is something you can do offline. This maybe you connect to a device and say hello and see if that works. This is something you do offline, compile the YANG models. Then this next level here is when you actually talk to the device, you will see, is it actually sending data that corresponds to this YANG model? Quite often, they say the range is 1 to 10, but you say 25, or they send foo back to me, and it kind of doesn't match the YANG model. So this is when you start to interact with the device, you might see that they are not following the YANG model. The next level after that is the most interesting one, and that is where the NSO Interop Lab is usually focusing the work. I mean, we are working together with you and vendors and everybody to validate that these things are properly working. And the transactionality. So if NSO sends an edit config to a device, we expect that exactly those things that we sent will be updated exactly like that, and nothing else happens. And if something fails, nothing should happen at all. So that's all or nothing semantics. So that's something that we spend some time on verifying that this is actually, for those use cases that we care about, that this is the case. And also all at once, which means that a transaction is happening instantaneous. There's no time inside the transaction. It's something that's atomic. You can't say that it is. So if you send the edit config, set A to 5 and B to 7, it is the same thing as set B to 7, set A to 5. The sequence or whatever you want to call it inside the transaction doesn't matter. But some devices don't implement it like that. So that's something we test here. And also validity of config. Sometimes you see devices that say, yeah, hey, you can have this config, but only if you have disabled this other thing first. And this other, or if you have this line card, then you can configure it like that. But if you don't have line card, okay, then you can't. So that is something that the validity in netconf and YANG, the validity of a particular configuration should depend only on that configuration. You should be able to give me the YANG modules for that part of the world and the config, and I should be able to offline determine if it's valid or not. And finally, we have autoconfig. So that's when a device reconfigures itself. Or if I say ABC and the device comes back and say ABCD, well, then it did something. It changed the configuration in some way spontaneously. And that's also something that's not okay in an automation world. So if you are interested in participating with your devices, either as user of NSO or as a vendor of a device, feel free to interact, to come to us. Sal, stand up. You're the leader of the NSO Interop Programmability at Cisco.
Sorry?
You're the leader of programmability at Cisco around NSO anyway. Yeah.
So this is a program.
You need the mic.
This is,
Sorry for doing this. Sal didn't know.
This is all spontaneous.
Yeah.
But this is a program that we're just launching. Right now it's focused on equipment vendors. And at the moment, it's really driven by the tail left part of the organization that licenses CompD, but soon it will be a part of a Cisco Solution Partner Program. And it's open to any vendors that are adopting NetConf, whether it's CompD or their own or some other NetConf solution.
Thank you, Sal. I just wanted to give a face to everybody. So in this, if you come to the NSO Interop Lab, which is to me or to Sal, then you can get NSO. It's freely downloadable for non-production use. So for testing and verifying things, anybody in the world can do that. You get the NetConf net builder, or if you're using NSO4, then you can use Pioneer to build your NetConf nets automatically, or at least semi-automatically. You get the Dr. Net Examiner, which is a testing tool, which is testing these transactionality constraints. And you can get YANG Doctor email support, and YANG Doctor, that's me. If you send me a mail and talking about these things, I probably will be interested and I might respond. So. And what you need to bring on your own is you need to bring this device or system or whatever it is that you want to be tested. You bring that, right? I don't have them. And you need to have a lab or a laptop or something that you have where you can install all the software and run these things. I don't provide that for you. You get it. And you also need to have an idea about what it is that you want to test. You probably don't want to test everything from the first module A, top, and then go all the way to the bottom, because it's going to take a long time. But you can concentrate on the few things that you know that your customers will care most about. This VPN, whatever use case, and this, say some other abbreviation, L2, PPP, whatever. I mean, something that you think is important with your device, bring that, bring a few configurations. You can do it like this or like that, and with this IP and with that IP, and you just show that these configurations work, and then we will publish that to the world. Everybody, we'll check it into GitHub, the whole test case, so everybody can say, yeah, we actually verify that this works with NSO. It's transactional and works nicely. So if we believe that this actually works, we'll put it on the GitHub, and it is an official thing. Everybody can see, and they can try it out on their own if they have a device. So if you're an equipment vendor, and you think you are good at NetConf and programmability, I think this is a good opportunity to show one of the biggest communities of a NetConf and programmability users in the world, which is the NSO community, to show them that you have a solution that actually works. So come here, get your listing in there. And if you're equipment user, meaning NSO user, I think it makes sense that you tell your vendors that this is important, so they should come here. Or if they don't want to come to us, so at least go to EANTC, which is the sort of neutral body, which is not Cisco. I mean, it's a testing house in Germany that is doing testing of network equipment, and come there and certify or show them that these whatever test cases EANTC are demonstrating, we participate there, and it's interoperating. So push your vendors. If you want this to happen, if you want this green world on the left here where things are free, tell your vendors to go there. They won't go there unless you ask for it. So EANTC, what is that? I'll give you a very brief overview of what happened at this year's yearly EANTC Interop event. So this is something that's been happening for the last 5 years. I mean, EANTC is a spin-off of the Technical University in Berlin. It stands for European Advanced Networking Test Center, I think, right? And they have been running their operations for 25 years, maybe, or something. And they have been testing interoperability when it comes to BGP, to clocking, to ISIS, all sorts of other things for many, many years, from all the different vendors. So Juniper is there, Huawei is there, Cisco is, of course, there, and many, and small and large. And they're testing lots of different use cases. You can see there were, in this year's catalog, there was 50 test cases, 18 around EVPN, 13 about segment routing, 3 about microwave, 7 about PCE, 6 of them were NetConf and YANG, 8 about clocking. So every vendor that comes there with their equipment can then sign up. Oh, yeah, I want to participate in 2 of those, and those 4, and so on. So you just volunteer to come up, and you join. You Juniper, you can work with me on this one, because you need to have several vendors in each use case. You build an alliance, you demonstrate it to EANTC, and they, if you're successful, if they feel that you have demonstrated the use case they set up, you get a catalog listing and the description of what you did. And only the positive results are disclosed in Paris in the MPLS World Congress show there. So that means, since everything that fails is not shown, you can get very bold. You can try things that you don't know. Is this maybe going to work? I don't know. We can try it, and we'll see. Maybe we'll learn, because that's actually the best thing about this EANTC thing. You learn. It's a place where I learn a lot by trying out interoperating with all sorts of very interesting equipment. And also an opportunity for me to teach those that don't interoperate well. This is what you are missing. Maybe you can come back next year and do this better. So it's actually, I think it's a very good place to advance the industry. And if you as service providers like this thing, you don't necessarily need to come, but you need to make sure that those vendors that you're using are coming here. So ask them about the results if you care. It's a 2-week thing. I go there every year. Very intense. Here's just an example of a test case. Or there's actually different, for NetConf and YANG, there are different levels. So you have some very basic NetConf. For example, can I flip a bit on your device? Yeah, okay, so that's the sort of very basic thing. Or if you're going one level higher, there's the test cases for L2 and L3 VPNs. So that's setting up a whole service on where the device is participating in the service. And the third thing is real orchestration with multiple layers of NSOs or something similar that are managing different domains and setting up a service across multiple domains. That's real orchestration for you. And then we have, when it comes to NSO, we implement that as the IETF L3 VPN service with an extra topology YANG module to keep track of what should be connected with what. And then we have device models for the PEs in the network, YANG models that we downloaded and built using Pioneer or NetBuilder. And then we manage this and get traffic across with a service app that's something like 100 lines of Python. And for that is managing a number of different devices. This year, I think I had 4 device types in this. Last year, I think I had over 10. Yeah, so this was this year I brought NSO 501 there. That was a good test. We claimed that NSO 5 would be better at managing many device NEDs at the same time, and it actually worked very nicely. I was impressed. Next Interop event at the EANTC is in the spring of 2020, in February, March. So if you're a vendor and want to show that your solution really works well, go to EANTC. You can come to NSO Interop Lab. Of course, we will talk to our customers. But if you want to show the world on the show floor from a neutral referee, you can come to and enroll for EANTC 2020. And if you go early enough so that you talk to EANTC already in September, October, or something like that, you can also be part of the team that decides what the use cases should look like, which use cases should we bring in. You saw something about L2 and L3 VPNs. That was because in the fall we were discussing with EANTC, yeah, those are interesting things. But if you have a device that's doing something else than L2 or L3 VPNs, I don't know what it's doing, firewall, then we can have firewall use cases in the test set as well. And if you are an equipment user, NSO user, check those results. Every year there's a new catalog of test results coming out. And look if your vendor is listed there. And if you're not, you can ask them why they are not there. OK, I have a couple of minutes left to tell you what's going on in the YANG community in the larger world. So, for example, we have a new version of the guidelines for authors and reviewers of documents containing YANG data models, the guideline documents 6087 that everybody's been using. This is the review, what you should look at when you're reviewing YANG models. So if you're developing your own YANG models, you probably have looked at 6087. But now it's been upgraded to 8407. And that then also covers news for YANG 1.1, for example. And there are many clarifications when it comes to XPath. And there's a new section in there on how you should name your names in the YANG models. That may be good to have a handle on. They're also now touching on RESTconf and NMDA and things like this that did not exist in the previous version. IETF has spread out the YANG work, so now there's over 30 different working groups that are developing YANG modules. It's really spread out in a very wide fashion. So these are the 30 groups that published an RFC with a YANG model in the last 12 months. So there's, and if you also add to this all of the drafts, there's hundreds of drafts in IETF right now for different YANG models. So it's getting hard to keep up, have a sense of what's going on. And there's also, of course, this is just IETF, but a lot of other standardization bodies are also developing YANG modules at this time. So it's quite a big movement by now. And then all the vendors, of course, with Cisco and Juniper and whoever. One of the biggest moments in the YANG development world, I think, was the standardization of access control lists, because they are central to very many use cases. They will be using ACLS. And also what's cool about ACLS is that they gave up, finally, after 30 years, it took us 30 years, to give up, to end using ACL rules with line numbers. Like, you remember from BASIC, you had 10, whatever, and then 30 go to 10 and stuff like that, right? So those line numbers are now gone. In the YANG view of ACLS, you have named rules that you can seek add in any order, because this line number stuff has been causing so much headache and so much disruption in the networking industry in the last 30 years. So you wouldn't believe it. It's for automation. I mean, it's maybe good for humans. Humans understand those line numbers, so they can work with them. They can renumber. They can do all sorts of things. But automation systems die by this. So the fact that we were able to get rid of that is something to really celebrate. This one alone is worth a champagne or two. For programmability, this is a big step. This is a Apollo 11 thing. We have YANG Library. YANG Library is a new way of, for a device to tell the world what's on it. These are the modules I have. And especially for YANG 1.1, this is now a mandatory thing to have. This is the new prescribed way of declaring what the device has. And if you want to go forward with things like YANG Schema Mount, which is basically how NSO 5 is managing NEDs and all of this, this is at the core. So it's a new thing. You have to read up on what YANG Library is if you want to work with YANG in the future. It's a new baseline, new core thing. And of course, Schema Mount. If you want to work with NSO, Schema Mount is now the official way of doing what NSO has always been doing. So this thing with loading many many different YANG models at the same device, device config place. It actually hasn't really been supported by RFCs. We are kind of been violating the RFCs for many years when it comes to that. But now we can put it in words. We can say that, yeah, this is this is YANG Schema Mount. That's what we are using. We still do the same thing, but we can now follow RFCs and explain how we are doing and what we are doing. Something that's going on very much looking forward is YANG push. So if you remember, when YANG and netconf were first defined, there was no notifications in there because the working group said, yeah, it's going to take another year to define that. Let's get what we have out without it, and we will add it as a module. Netconf and YANG is supposed to be modular, right? We can add that later. And then we have netconf notifications that came out a year later, as they said. But netconf notifications also did not support all the use cases that people were looking for, especially around telemetry. So now, after a few more years, there's a lot of work going on to define the next kind of notification mechanism in netconf called the YANG push, especially where you can subscribe to changes to some things or get periodic updates without actually asking. So there's a lot of things to look there. It's getting close to completion now. I expect that this time by next year we'll be talking about what it is.
Yeah, and you have 2 minutes.
Yes. I have only one more slide, I think, or maybe two. More on the YANG radar, just to mention, there's a lot of work going on in the IoT world. So small-scale IoT, small-scale netconf and YANG servers that can only do some small few things. And for example, CBOR, it's a concise binary object representation, RFC. So as a transport for, instead of using XML, you can use this. And the CoAP protocol is not over SSH, but over this instead for small devices. A lot of talk about how you manage YANG in the real world, in the life cycle. So how do you define packages? How can you define module tags so that you know which modules should be included and stuff like this? YANG module versioning is discussed a lot. And you have YANG-based instance data files, so you can load standardized. I mean, you can load files, you can load configurations in NSO today, but this is a standardized file format for configurations, so that not only NSO should support that, but all. And the last word here is, yeah, there's finally a YANG book. So if you want to read up about how you should program your networks, you can have a look at this book. And if you stay here until 11:15, I'll tell you more about it. I have 1 minute for questions.
Are there any quick questions? In the meantime, let's have Frederick come up and start switching computers. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and one quick question. With respect to the YANG push, can it work with the Google RPC?
Yeah, I mean, it is much inspired by what Google has been doing with the gRPC kind of telemetry things. So they are, you know, it's always hard to say what's going on with OpenConfig and IETF. They're always working together and hate each other. But it's they're getting inspiration from each other. So it's, I don't know how to say if it's going to work together or not. But yeah, but they're getting inspired from each other.
The question is, like, since gRPC is used very widely, how likely is that actually YANG push come and take over?
You say it's been used very widely, but I have actually not seen any deployments yet. So it's I doubt that it is widely used.
Even in our XR telemetry is on gRPC, right?
All right. Okay.
Very good. And I think we're at time. Jan will be back at 11:15, so he's not going anywhere. He's not going too far. But in the meantime, we're going to have. First of all, thank you, Jan. I mean, maybe a little round for this one.
Cisco, the bridge to possible.